At the conclusion dinner after a challenging year's work, I found myself amidst dim lights reflecting off polished cutlery, with elevated conversations yet always maintaining decorum. My eyes scanned the room, recognizing colleagues who had journeyed through the mundane and occasional stressful days together. She was captivating as ever, in a monochrome dress, her hair styled exquisitely, possessing an allure that compelled second glances. However, my pride in having her with me wouldn't persist long. It was when I stepped away to grab another glass of wine that events began to unravel. A suspicious motion at the room's edge piqued my interest. A stranger, clearly not from her usual group, was standing near her, exhibiting a closeness that seemed inappropriate. My steps faltered. Initially, I assumed it was merely casual banter, perhaps an old acquaintance. Yet, before I could look away, I witnessed the act that would create a chasm between us. His lips met hers, and she didn't recoil. A surge of rage, not love, coursed through me. The combination of incredulity and pain left me momentarily breathless. I advanced with resolute strides, ready to confront what, mere moments ago, I would have sworn was unthinkable. I grasped her arm forcefully enough to end any doubt that this was a mistake. The words gushed out of me like sharp blades, reflecting the pain in my heart. "You're finished for me right now. Our separation will commence. You will stay away from my children from now on, you betrayer." The atmosphere in the room was heavy with tension. Her gaze, once wandering, now locked onto the unfolding scene. She attempted to speak, her eyes conveying a mix of guilt and hopelessness, but I chose not to listen. The man beside her, startled by my response, retreated as if shying away from a shared accountability. Meanwhile, I remained fixated on her, the woman who had been my partner, confidante, and mother of my children. How could she wreak such havoc so brutally? I departed, leaving behind chaos, humiliation, and a wound that appeared unhealable. Yet, that night, something more substantial started to unfold, something beyond my expectations. That betrayal was not merely an isolated mistake. It was the hub of a complex network of lies, secrets, and detrimental decisions that would eventually be exposed in a catastrophic manner. As I struggled to regain my composure and begin rebuilding my life, the implications of their actions for her and her lover became evident. Unbeknownst to them, destiny wouldn't settle for a mere slap on the wrist. The choices they made that fateful night would set them on a path towards an unavoidable confrontation with something much greater. Hidden truths surfaced, unveiling the real personas I believed were friends. As they grappled with their actions' repercussions, I encountered a startling reality that drastically altered my narrative's direction. In retrospect, betrayal was merely the start. The initial agony evolved into an exploration, filled with unexpected twists and turns, and a redemption I never fathomed. However, I am still curious about that fateful night's events, and how each segment of this puzzle intertwined to produce such unforeseen repercussions. Though the quiet in the room lingers in my memory, it is within the answers that this story's essence lies. Welcome to the channel where narratives expose the devastating effects of treachery. Here, we do not endorse any form of infidelity. All tales are fictional and aim to demonstrate how poor decisions can shatter lives and relationships. Brace yourself for an exhilarating, dramatic plot with numerous twists. Prepare yourself to immerse in a tale that will evoke your feelings. Enjoy the narration. Daniel and Clara appeared as if taken straight from a perfect romance novel. He, a seasoned manager in a vast corporation, carried an air of authority, as if he bore the weight of maintaining equilibrium. In contrast, Clara exuded affection and empathy. An amateur artist in her leisure time and doting mother of two, she enchanted everyone with her gentleness. Their life together seemed idyllic from an outsider's perspective, boasting a strong marriage lasting over a decade, intelligent offspring, and a warm home that always felt welcoming to visitors. The commencement was reminiscent of a classic novel. They crossed paths at a casual gathering, where Clara, a budding art student, was showcasing her initial artwork, and Daniel, fresh from his latest promotion, was seeking decor for his new abode. Enamored by both her artistry and creations, Daniel found in Clara an unforeseen spark, her demure grin and eyes that radiated a room-filling luminescence, captivating him instantly. From then on, they were an unbreakable duo. He made her feel secure, sheltered as she guided him to perceive the beauty hidden in the overlooked aspects of life. As time passed, modifications occurred. Their initial residence was small but warm, each item echoing a tale. The hastily constructed bookshelf from their first weekend together, the paint splotches Clara left on the cushions while working on her artworks, and their straightforward meals brimming with profound discussions and laughter. With the arrival of their offspring, life assumed a distinct tempo. Clara poured herself into motherhood, whereas Daniel plunged into work to secure the family's financial future. Despite the hectic schedule, they preserved an extraordinary bond. Daniel frequently brought flowers unexpectedly, and Clara would consistently stay up at night, even if it was past usual hours, with a mug of tea prepared and ears tuned for his tales of the day. However, as with any marriage, time introduced obstacles. In-depth talks morphed into debates about finances and duties, and little acts of kindness started to feel routine instead of sincere expressions. The children, Lucas, 8, and Helena, 5, were the house's primary source of delight. Lucas mirrored Daniel's diligence, while Helena, the family artist, scattered paper, colored pencils, and creativity wherever she went. Clara often remarked that the two were the ideal harmony of their personalities, a testament to what they had constructed together. Despite his workload, Daniel purposefully saved Sundays for family time. It was sacrosanct, picnics in the park, board games, or family films. Despite an intangible, barely noticeable sensation lingering, Clara sensed a vacancy she couldn't articulate during quiet instances. Perhaps it stemmed from her scant personal time amidst her role as a mother and wife, for these duties depleted most of her vitality. Alternatively, it could have originated from the dwindling intensity of the ardor she once felt at the inception of their partnership. Daniel, conversely, perceived Clara's distant gaze, but remained unaware of how to tackle the topic. He assumed that his tireless work, yearly bonuses, and meticulously orchestrated getaways were sufficient expressions of his affection. Every Friday evening was set aside for them, no offspring, no labor, merely Daniel and Clara. This routine they endeavored to maintain, even as the silences began to eclipse laughter more frequently in recent months. On one particular evening, settled on the couch with mostly unexamined glasses of wine, Clara endeavored to initiate a discussion she had mentally prepared numerous times. He expressed his feeling of emptiness, hinting they might need to revisit the bond that initially drew them together. Daniel, somewhat awkwardly, mumbled that the pattern was as usual, considering it normal after so many years. The dialogue ended there, with Clara feigning a smile and Daniel vowing to ponder the issue later. It was then the company's annual dinner presented itself as an ideal escape from the routine. This event had always been grand, marked by formal exchanges, unending speeches, and a chance for Clara to wear her favorite dress, one she had purchased years ago but seldom donned. Daniel persisted in inviting her along, although Clara hesitated. "It will benefit us both," he remarked. Reluctantly consenting, she dedicated more effort than typical towards preparation. The objective was to appear stunning, to recall her former self before daily rituals consumed her entirely. Upon arrival at the salon, perfection reigned. Daniel exuded his usual assurance among co-workers, while Clara admired the opulent surroundings and observed faces radiating excitement. However, she felt slightly disoriented, like an out-of-tune note amidst that world. At a table, Clara twirled her engagement ring, lost in contemplation, as Daniel engaged enthusiastically with colleagues about a fresh business venture. In that instant, Clara acknowledged the expansive gap between them. It was not something explicable through words, yet it was palpable, evident in the actions, in the evasive gazes, in the lack of the once natural bond. Amidst his conversations, Daniel found himself grappling with Clara's quietude. A sense of guilt, a feeling he would never acknowledge even privately, gnawed at him for letting them reach this juncture. The evening's festivities unfolded as usual, punctuated by laughter from neighboring tables and the clinking of glasses in toast. Daniel occasionally attempted to draw Clara back into the conversation, but she appeared preoccupied, as if the evening presented an opportunity to reconsider everything they had encountered, the decisions they made, and their aspirations for the future. Inside her swirled a tempest of emotions that she couldn't quite define. In this setting, fate began to subtly arrange its pieces, paving the way for events that would irrevocably alter their lives forever. The night carried on within the grand hall, the lights intensifying as the music served as an unobtrusive soundtrack to animated chats among colleagues. Daniel navigated among clusters of coworkers, his demeanor consistently composed, yet observing Clara's position at a table. She had engaged briefly with executives' wives in cordial exchanges and insincere banter that couldn't alleviate the void in her heart. Whenever Daniel glanced her way, he saw an expression on Clara's face he couldn't define, but it mirrored something lacking. Perhaps it was weariness from routine or a restlessness yet to be comprehended. Meanwhile, Clara experienced a blend of discomfort and self-reflection. Despite the bustle around her, her thoughts meandered, recalling instances in her life that had slipped away like grains of sand. She didn't quite feel sadness, more like the gradual disappearance of something valuable, a flickering flame about to be extinguished. Pushing herself up, she moved towards the bar for a glass of wine, waiting. A presence beside him materialized, a face that seemed acquainted yet not quite recollectable. The man stood poised, his demeanor relaxed, but with eyes that probed, scrutinizing her actions. He offered a self-assured smile, one that suggested he anticipated the responses he elicited. Their interaction started casually on the topic of wine, but Clara discerned a depth in his tone beyond mere politeness. He was Daniel's newly mentioned marketing manager, someone Clara had previously disregarded until then. His gaze towards her was simultaneously unsettling and alluring, as if he perceived in her what Daniel had ceased to see. In their exchange, Clara sensed a flicker of emotion she hadn't felt in quite some time. It wasn't solely the discourse itself, but his attentiveness to each nuance, as if every phrase held significant importance. Simultaneously, a whispering guilt stirred within her, attempting to remind her of her commitments and the person she was supposed to be with. However, his focus on her was strikingly different from the silence that Daniel often permitted during their private moments. While Daniel was engrossed in a lengthy conversation with the CFO discussing next year's projections, he was oblivious to the scene unfolding across the room. In contrast, Clara felt a tumult of conflicting feelings. He was quick-witted and managed to make her laugh, a sensation she had not felt in a long time, and his eyes sparkled with an allure that mirrored what she tried to dismiss in herself, her yearning to be noticed, to be heard. However, there was an intentional quality to him, suggesting he carefully chose his words to diffuse her resistance. As the evening progressed, Clara felt drawn into a precarious situation. Upon Daniel's return, she exhibited more vivacity, though remained aloof. Mentioning her new acquaintance offhandedly, she didn't appreciate how much she inadvertently revealed. Daniel concealed his jealousy, but the unease lingered within him, a feeling he couldn't ignore. He masked it with a smile, but her talk about the man ignited a flicker of worry. Later, as people started departing and dinner wound down, Clara stepped outside to the garden for some fresh air. The breeze helped clarify her thoughts, yet didn't entirely dispel the feelings that persisted in her chest. Leaning against a bench, she gazed at the city lights in the distance when she heard footsteps approaching from behind. Once more, it was him, the man who appeared reluctant to relinquish her company on that particular night. Initially discussing the allure of the city under the cover of darkness, his conversation abruptly shifted to a more intimate, direct topic. Clara found herself immobile, despite an inner compulsion to retreat. There was an inexplicable allure about him, contradicting her rational mind's urgings to return inside and seek Daniel. Meanwhile, Daniel searched the salon for his wife, feeling an escalating unease upon not locating her. He inquired of others if they had seen her, yet none could provide a clue as to her whereabouts. This was when he decided to venture out to find her. Upon rounding the corner that led into the garden, he encountered a scene that halted his progress and caused his blood to run cold. There stood Clara, stationary and close by, nearer than any man should be to the woman he adored. Daniel watched long enough to discern something amiss. The proximity, the manner in which the man touched her arm, as if probing her boundaries. The decisive strike was when he watched as the man kissed Clara, hesitant yet undeterred. Daniel's reaction couldn't be suppressed. With each stride, his anger grew, pulling Clara along with him forcefully, leaving her bewildered. His words sliced through the air, heavy with a pain he never anticipated. The man recoiled, caught off guard and disturbed, while Clara, tears streaming down her face, struggled to provide an explanation that would fall short. The ensuing silence was more deafening than any shout. Daniel's tormented expression, Clara's humiliation, and the man's obvious discomfort created a tension almost unbearable. He cast one last look at her, words choked in his throat, and left, taking with him not just their wedding day, but a lifetime of memories that now appeared devoid of significance. At that moment, he was unaware that the act of betrayal was merely the prelude to something far larger, destined to be unveiled. Daniel navigated deserted streets, his mind in turmoil, emotions swirling chaotically beyond order. Clara's deception had struck him forcefully, yet in its wake, a quiet desire for retribution was growing within him. He sought clarification, not merely about the events of that night, but about everything that had preceded them. He pulled up outside the house he once thought sanctuary and gazed at it as if viewing an unfamiliar structure. The lights were off, yet he knew Clara resided within. After taking a deep breath, he entered. She sat in the living room, her complexion pallid, hands trembling, clinging to a now cold cup of tea. The door's opening caused her to look up swiftly, her red, bloodshot eyes pleading for conversation he appeared unwilling to initiate. Daniel stepped in, shutting the door, striding steadily to the room's core. He remained quiet initially as a heavy stillness filled the space. Clara was the one who spoke first, her tone soft and frail. "Daniel, I'm at a loss about where to begin, but please, hear me out." It wasn't as it appeared. I acknowledge my error, but it wasn't deliberate. My actions left me bewildered. They echoed in the void of an unseen barrier. Daniel stood unmoving, casting a chilly gaze that conveyed only disapproval. When he eventually spoke, his voice was hushed, yet every word reverberated with intensity, making Clara tremble. "Lost? Confused? Is this how you rationalize your actions? I devoted years to being what you required. I labored, I aspired, I made concessions. And you decided to wreck it all. Why? Because you craved life. Why did you believe I stopped observing?" Clara struggled to rise, her legs weakened by his words, which pierced like knives despite their truthfulness. "She never intended to hurt you, Daniel. Never. I merely lost self-control. I can't explain what overtook me." He sneered, a mocking laugh laced with irony, before shaking his head. "Did you lose control? It seems you've lost far more than that. Now, do you expect forgiveness from me? That we should act as if nothing transpired?" Her eyes pleaded for comprehension, but there was an edge to Daniel's voice, darker than any shout. "I require the truth, Clara. Every detail. No falsehoods. Who is he? When did this begin? And why on earth would you jeopardize our lives for someone like that?" Clara spoke timidly, each word a laborious endeavor. "He's merely someone who appeared, Daniel. It means nothing." Daniel interjected, his voice raised. Wasn't it clear? Why did she feel so at ease in his embrace if it wasn't familiar? Hadn't they met only a few months ago? But it felt as though this wasn't their first encounter. She hesitated, her gaze averted by his intensity. It was indeed not. "I crossed paths with him several months ago, yet I never imagined this would transpire. It was a lapse, irrational and inappropriate." Daniel attempted to suppress his fury, taking a deep breath. "So you not only deceived me, but also our children. For the sake of our family, you deceived everyone, pretending to be someone else. Is that what you're telling me?" Clara started sobbing, her tears cascading uncontrollably. "I acknowledge there's no justification, Daniel, but I love you. I have always loved you. Despite the contradiction, I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family." He turned away, circling the room like a captive beast. "You've already lost, Clara. You forfeited when you concluded I wasn't enough, when he deemed someone like himself more significant than all we constructed. Worse still, I'm unsure if you truly grasp the implications of your actions or if you merely regret being discovered. A hush fell over the room until Daniel gazed at you with a blend of pain and determination. Don't you recognize him? You're aware of his principles, aren't you? Clara hesitated, on the verge of speaking, but Daniel interrupted, his voice tinged with an unfathomable emotion. He isn't merely a stranger, Clara. He's married, isn't he? He has a family. I discovered something interesting, though his wife works at the same company as mine. She was at that dinner. She witnessed everything. Shock washed over Clara's face as her eyes widened. Daniel, I didn't know she was there. He never mentioned it to me. Daniel chuckled again, but this time his laughter was icy, almost robotic. He didn't reveal it because he understood that if you recognized the truth, you might hesitate before shattering two families in a single evening. She started trembling, gripping the cup she had abandoned on her lap. I don't know what to say or how to rectify this situation. Daniel stepped closer to her as his initial anger transformed into something more chilling and strategic. There's no remedy for this, Clara. But there is something essential you should be aware of. He isn't the person you perceive him to be. He has a past, and I discovered every detail. He manipulates relationships, causes destruction, and then departs, leaving behind a trail of chaos. Clara stared at him in disbelief, her eyes wide. That can't be accurate. He appeared so genuine. Daniel shook his head, expressing disappointment. And you fell for it. You were simply another casualty on his list. Now I must cope with the aftermath of all this, while he escapes unscathed. The disclosure's burden appeared to overwhelm Clara, leaving her unsure whether to weep for her own deceit or the agony of being tricked so cruelly. Daniel cast one final glance at her before exiting the room. You desired truth, Clara. Now you possess it. The sole query that remains is, how will you handle it? With these words, he departed, leaving Clara solitary with the burden of her decisions and the pain of pending repercussions. Clara persisted in the living room, the quiet within the house almost intolerable. Daniel's parting words resonated in her mind like an unbearable weight. She recognized she had erred. She acknowledged she had shattered the trust of a man who had always cherished her. But the recent revelations only intensified her confusion. She felt a combination of shame, fury, and sorrow, yet above all, a profound emptiness. The individual she'd sacrificed everything for wasn't the person he appeared to be, and the realization of this seared more intensely than any accusation Daniel might have leveled. She understood she couldn't stay put, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. Following what felt like hours and minutes, he rose and ventured to the kitchen, as if action could alleviate the burden weighing on his chest. The only sound that pierced the quiet was water filling a glass. However, even the icy drink failed to quench the heat that guilt ignited. Concurrently, Daniel navigated aimlessly down an apparently deserted street, mirroring the emptiness he felt within. Clara's words struck him in disconnected snippets, but what echoed most profoundly was the knowledge that she had never fully grasped the harm she inflicted. He was drained, not physically, but his spirit felt drained, as if years of trust and affection had been depleted in a matter of days. Without conscious thought, Daniel pulled up outside a modest bar. In this solitary hideout, escapism was the desired course. He stepped in, chose a secluded spot, and requested a strong double whiskey. Solitude and resolution were all he craved. As he sipped, his phone buzzed within his pocket. He hesitated, expecting it to be Clara. Unexpectedly, it was a message from an unrecognized number. The brief missive read, "Let's discuss. I know what transpired. Can we meet?" Daniel furrowed his brow in curiosity. The sender was Molly, the name linked with a spouse of the man Clara had been involved with. After a moment's pause, he responded, "Where?" The swift reply carried the location of a 24-hour coffee shop. Daniel completed his drink and departed without uttering a word to the barkeep. On the chilly evening, clarity seemed to seep into his mind as he navigated towards the prearranged spot. Unexpectedly encountering Molly wasn't part of his plan, but he felt compelled to uncover more secrets hidden within that tale. Upon arrival, a woman sat in a discreet corner. Molly was attractive, yet her exhaustion and tension were noticeable. Daniel approached her, receiving a nod in return. He took a seat opposite him without fanfare, and there was a momentary silence as if they were both evaluating each other. "I appreciate your presence," Molly began, her voice soft but resolute. "This might seem unusual, but I felt the need to speak with you before making any decisions." Daniel merely nodded, allowing her to continue. "I'm aware of my husband and his wife's relationship. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it, saying this is hard, but there's something else you should be informed about." Daniel's eyes narrowed, feeling a sinking sensation in his stomach. "More?" he barely whispered, unsure if he was prepared for more disclosures. Molly inhaled deeply before speaking up. "My spouse is not an honorable individual. It's not just about our marriage. He has a history of deceiving and exploiting women, leveraging his power to obtain his desires. I'm not merely referring to infidelity. There are allegations, instances that never saw justice because he always managed to suppress the people involved." Daniel shifted forward, his gaze locked on hers. "Why are you disclosing this to me now? Why didn't you simply depart from him before these events unfolded?" Molly averted her gaze, wrestling with her own feelings. "I made attempts. However, he consistently found ways to keep me bound. Emotional and financial extortion, you can hardly imagine the extent of his capabilities. When I discovered his affair with another woman, something shifted. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about him causing further harm, and I knew I had to act." The ensuing silence was dense. Daniel felt his rage resurfacing once more, this time laced with a growing sense of urgency. "What do you require from me, Molly?" he inquired ultimately. "I seek justice, not just for us, but for all those he harmed. I understand your preoccupation with your personal matters, yet this transcends that. It requires exposure, and I believe we possess the means to accomplish it." Daniel leaned back in his seat, pondering the statement. The notion of collaborating with Molly seemed implausible, yet plausible at the same time. He couldn't rectify Clara's actions, but perhaps he could prevent this man from causing more harm. After a moment, he nodded thoughtfully. "I am uncertain about what lies ahead, but I am committed. He will not evade justice." Molly appeared relieved yet resolute. "Thank you. Let's proceed ethically." She rose, leaving Daniel to grapple with the torrent of feelings surging within him. He acknowledged that a significant journey still awaited him, one to confront the specters of his past and reconcile with the woman who once held his world together. Now, he had a goal rebuilding, and this was enough for Daniel to begin anew, as he walked back to his car after his encounter with Molly. The talk with her still reverberated in his mind, every word resonating with an uncomfortable truth and burden that he now bore. It was disturbing to learn that the man who wrecked his marriage was causing similar harm to others, but what truly unsettled him was the realization that Clara had been part of this cycle of destruction. Daniel wasn't sure if his thirst for justice was for her, for himself, or simply because he couldn't abide the thought of the man escaping punishment. Upon returning home, Daniel found Clara awake, her eyes red from lack of sleep. The quiet between them seemed denser than ever. He knew that careful words were required, but fatigue and irritation made him yearn for frankness, even brutality if necessary. Clara stood up cautiously, fearful that any action might shatter something delicate and beyond repair between them. He moved closer, maintaining a measured space, seemingly unwilling to overstep any boundary. "I found Molly." The words hung heavy, and Clara stiffened. Her lips quivered slightly, yet no words escaped. Daniel persisted, his voice steady but tinged with bitterness she recognized instantly. "It appears your friend isn't just a betrayer. He's a manipulator, a liar, and from what she told me, someone who has wrecked lives in the past. I thought the issue was merely between us, but now I understand it's far more extensive." Clara eventually found her voice, barely audible. "I didn't know Daniel. I had no idea. He never shared anything about it with me." Daniel chuckled, but it held no mirth, only disbelief. "Of course. Do you truly believe someone like him would expose his true motives? He saw in you what he required. An opening for action, yet you crumpled beneath it." Clara bowed her head, tears silently cascading down. His words were a burden she could hardly bear, yet knew they held truth. Still, there was an element in his tone that suggested fury had subsided. Daniel sat up, finally releasing some of the tension from his shoulders. Molly and I are taking action. He can't continue like this. She has sufficient proof, evidence enough to bring him down, and I will ensure he faces the repercussions. Clara stared at him, bewildered and fearful. Will you reveal it? Won't this further tear us apart? Daniel looked back at her, pain etched on his face. We are already torn apart, Clara. We're just not aware of it yet. The divide is, now I possess an opportunity to give significance to it. The dialogue concluded without reaching a settlement, leaving Clara pondering solitarily while Daniel secluded himself in the guest chamber, the barrier between them serving as both physical and metaphorical impediment. She spent the night wide awake, mulling over everything she had forfeited and what she might still stand to lose. It wasn't solely her marriage on the line, but also her self-image. How had she permitted her life to spiral to such a juncture? The following day, Daniel convened with Molly at a discreet cafe to strategize their next step. She presented a folder brimming with records, recordings, and emails that exposed her spouse's pattern of misconduct. He exploited his position for manipulation, seduction, and destruction. The weight of the proof was staggering, yet disturbing. Daniel felt a concoction of pride and revulsion as he scrutinized each document, witnessing the magnitude of the havoc that man had wrought. Molly spoke firmly, though a hint of vulnerability echoed in her tone. We must strategize for the revelation. She had seen this situation before and knew their adversary would stop at nothing to suppress them. Daniel acknowledged with a nod, but his thoughts were preoccupied with Clara. Despite her wishes, she might become entangled in this ordeal. To safeguard what remained of his family, he knew he'd have to devise means to mitigate the fallout. The ensuing days were fraught with tension and anticipation. Molly and Daniel gathered evidence, reached out to lawyers, and ensured the information was shared responsibly. Each action was deliberate, each decision well thought out to dodge repercussions. However, the emotional strain was mounting. Daniel found himself pulled between his yearning for normalcy and his commitment to seek justice. Clara, conversely, wrestled with internal conflict. Avoiding Daniel, she realized any dialogue would further widen the gap. Yet, she acknowledged she couldn't hide indefinitely. One evening, finding him engrossed in work at his temporary office, she entered hesitantly, clutching an envelope. I must share something with you. His face remained expressionless as he invited her to proceed. She set the envelope on the table and retreated, as if its contents were a ticking time bomb. Daniel opened the envelope and found a letter penned by Clara. In it, she admitted her errors, disclosed her emotions, and shared how she had strayed from her path. However, what astounded him was the final section. Clara had uncovered that the suspect in question was engaging in illicit activities at the company, and she possessed information vital to the case. I didn't know how to inform you. I didn't wish to seem like I was attempting to repair things for my own redemption. Daniel appeared taken aback. Why didn't you share this earlier? She questioned, holding back tears. I feared you would see it as a ploy for your mercy. I merely want an end, Daniel, for us, for the kids, for myself. After a brief pause, he contemplated her words. Whether genuine or a compensatory act, her disclosure could potentially alter everything. They spent the subsequent hours scrutinizing Clara's findings together. For the first time in weeks, there was an unsteady collaboration between them, tinged with tension. It seemed as though, for a fleeting instance, the agony and resentment were temporarily shelved in favor of something bigger. Daniel remained uncertain about forgiveness, but in that instant, he understood he needed her to bring their endeavor to a conclusion. As Clara retires for the night, she casts Daniel a hesitant, hopeful glance. Thank you for hearing me out. Without immediate reply, Daniel's gaze lingered on her ascent up the stairs. He comprehended that the path to resolution would be arduous and unpredictable, yet in this instance, he sensed a hint of something transcending pain, maybe not reconciliation, but rather comprehension. For now, that sufficed. The forthcoming days, prior to the revelation, were filled with tension and anticipation. Daniel and Molly collaborated meticulously, refining every aspect to make the evidence against the culprit undeniable. Their strategy was straightforward yet daring, a public exposition orchestrated by Molly, who, through her company role, intended to disclose the facts. She had garnered backing from other associates who, despite their fear, were ready to disclose the truth. Clara observed from a distance, understanding she couldn't participate in that instant, yet feeling an unceasing agitation, a blend of guilt and optimism. Regardless of the result, she yearned for Daniel to discover some tranquility following the turmoil. She was also aware that their marriage had reached its end. Clara devoted her final days to her children, attempting to reconnect with the piece of her life that remained unscathed. When the day finally came, the company's ambience brimmed with inquisitiveness and tension. Molly had summoned an impromptu gathering, and the auditorium was filled with employees and executives. Daniel stood hidden in a corner, observing as Molly ascended the stage. Her voice was resolute, but it bore a burden that only he appeared to perceive. She initiated her speech with a clear introduction, clarifying that the meeting aimed to address unethical practices within the corporation. Shortly afterward, she disclosed the initial proof, financial documents exposing her spouse's use of business funds for his clandestine affairs. The response was swift. Whispers swirled through the crowd, but Molly persisted. She unveiled text messages, emails, testimonies from other victims. The man in the front row exhibited a mix of fury and fear. He attempted to interject, yet Molly pressed on relentlessly. When she concluded, an eerie stillness blanketed the room. It was Daniel who shattered the tranquility, rising and advancing towards him. With a steady yet emotional tone, he declared that he wasn't merely present as a personal victim, but as someone determined to put a stop to this. Daniel's words served as the final strike, leaving the man with no escape route. The corporation swiftly initiated a formal probe. That day, the man was forced out of the building as frightened co-workers started disclosing their own ordeals. The public unmasking was devastating for him, impacting both his professional and personal life. Molly filed for divorce the following day, terminating years of manipulation and abuse. She appeared to be liberated, yet she bore the marks of her past suffering. Daniel, conversely, did not instantly feel relieved. Defeating the man brought a sense of justice, but it also revealed the void that now filled his life. He had lost his marriage, his emotional equilibrium, and in a way, the persona he cultivated with Clara. Nevertheless, he recognized it was time for a fresh start. He sold the house they shared and moved into a smaller apartment to focus on himself and his kids. Sundays were still reserved for children, but there was now an uncanny similarity in their interactions that had previously seemed inconceivable. Clara embarked on her journey towards amends. She initiated counseling, aiming to unravel the reasons behind her repeated errors and restore her bond with her children. Though her kids noticed the alterations, it remained challenging for Lucas to accept the rift between his parents. Clara understood that their pardons would be a gradual process, mirroring the process of forgiving herself. A fortnight later, Daniel received an unanticipated offer from Molly for a cup of coffee. He consented, more from inquisitiveness than craving. Upon meeting, their discussion was casual, devoid of the historical burden that had once tied them. Molly appeared altered, less burdensome, and Daniel observed that she, too, was striving to reconstruct her life. They conversed about their offspring, daily struggles, and for the first time, the future. There were no pledges or anticipations, merely an unspoken comprehension that they had both survived the same inferno and become more resilient. The conclusion of their journey emphasized acceptance over resolution. Clara navigated her way past Daniel, finding a path forward. Molly tasted the liberty that had long eluded her. Meanwhile, Daniel, marred by suffering, acknowledged potential for something novel. Although he continued to sense Clara's void, he understood that love's return would manifest differently. The cycle of devastation terminated, and instead, a fresh opportunity emerged for all involved. We invite you to share your thoughts. Do you think the characters' decisions were just? Leave a comment with your opinion. Stay tuned to our channel for more captivating tales like this one. This narrative illustrates how betrayal can shatter lives, but also how it is feasible to find atonement. And always keep in mind, our channel does not condone any form of infidelity. Until next time,